Hey everyone, welcome to the channel if you're a new viewer, and welcome back if you're a subscriber. I appreciate it. It's a beautiful day here in Illinois. Hope you're having a great day. Got the garage open and thought I would take you through installing the Howe Racing Enterprises hydraulic throwout bearing on the T5 Borg Warner that I'm going to be mating up to the LS, the 5.3 LS motor via the QuickTime bell housing that I had installed already. There's a couple measurements that need to be taken. It's nothing crazy. They give you pretty self-explanatory instructions on what you need to do and how you need to do it. So I'll take you through that process and I'll show you how we got it done. All right, so this is the Borg Warner T5 that came out of the 85 Z28 that I'm working on, which is originally a 5-speed car. And as you can see, I have it on a dolly just for stability, and have it ratcheted to the actual dolly so that that doesn't go sliding around or dropping while you're working on it, which I found to be pretty helpful. Otherwise, they like to rock and roll. And I've also used some of my car dollies, the wheel dollies that I have, and I put it on there when I was just moving it around and needed to, shuffle things around during winter. But basically, what you're going to need for installing a hydraulic throwout bearing on the T5 is a couple things. Obviously you're going to need a T5 transmission that's in good shape, which this one was. Before this was removed, there was no problems with the synchros and no grinding, nothing, getting it in and out of gear. So it was in very, very good condition. This is the Howe Racing Enterprises throwout bearing kit that I believe I've shown before, and that's the part number 82876. Never mind the 82870. You want 82876. That works for the T5s. So you'll need that. And that basically is going to come with, you have your throwout bearing, the hydraulic throwout bearing. You have 10 shims provided that are all at, I believe, the 0.50 in thickness. And you'll get 2 studs with this kit so that you know which one to use. I just basically compared the threads from the stud that I removed out of that faceplate from the transmission, and you're gonna get a 5/16 by 18 stud and a 3/8 by 16 stud. I ended up going with the the 5/16 by 18 stud for that piece of the transmission. And I had already pre-installed that, didn't video it. But basically, it's as simple as removing the factory bolt that you see there on the left and replacing it with that stud there. I did throw, I noticed when I pulled the stud out, it had some ATV on it, and I don't know I believe that was probably just from the face of that plate to the transmission, but I just put a little bit on that thread. I mean a little bit, as it was almost near its end of the travel, and I just put a little bit on there to keep any possible transmission fluid, ATF, from escaping. So that's what you'll need. I also have a digital caliper, and that's for making the measurements from the bell housing to the clutch fingers, and then from the throwout bearing to the face of the transmission where it mates to the bell housing. So I'll take you through that process right now. All right, so this is where we're at with making the measurements for the bell housing and the throwout bearing to the transmission. We're going to start at the bell housing first, and this is just going based off of the instructions that Howe Racing provides you with. And basically it says you're skipping over, with replace the bearing retainer bolt in the 2 o'clock position with the 5/16 or 3/8 stud, which I already talked about. We replaced it with the 5/16 stud. Step 2 was install the throwout bearing over the bearing retainer shaft, making sure the newly installed stud is between the 2 fittings of the throwout bearing, which I've already done, and that does that fits. Step 3 says assemble flywheel and clutch on the crank and bolt on the bell housing, which is where we're at here. So before installing, you need to measure. It says step 4, before installing you need to measure the distance from the bell housing surface to the clutch fingers and write it down. So that's the first step in step 4. So to do that, I have this piece of metal. It's actually a fret for guitars. It's just a straight level piece of metal that's used for guitar measurements. And basically what you do, you're gonna turn on I have a digital caliper reader here, but this could be done with a regular slide rule if you wanted. I put this right up against the bell housing, and I've got this reading in inches so that it makes it easier for me, and begin sliding this in. Get this lined up with the clutch fingers. Slide this in till you make contact with a clutch finger and record that measurement, which in this case was 3.074 inches. Now what I did was, and they don't tell you to do this, but I thought to get my best measurement, I just ended up going around and checking to see what measurements were at each clutch finger to see what I'd get as an average, and if it would be generally in the same area. And just went around to basically around the clock on it. I don't know if you can see that, but on this one got 3.099, and then took a measurement from the top. So after I did that, I came up with an average after making all those measurements. And then obviously, the one thing I didn't say was you're going to want to take whatever you're using as a slide or as a straight edge. I just took a measurement of what the thickness was of that and subtracted it from my overall measurement. And in this case, this piece of flat stock was 0.075, so 7/100 thick. Subtracted that from each measurement that I took, and I only took 3. I came up with an average of 2.98 inches from the face of the bell housing to the clutch fingers that are inside. So once I have that measurement, it says to then install your hydraulic throwout bearing onto the transmission without any shims, and record the measurement from the face of the throwout bearing to the face of the transmission, which is what I'm going to show you next. All right, here we are back at the transmission, and this is when we're going to get ready to take our measurement of the throwout bearing placed on the shaft from the front of the throwout bearing to the transmission for our second measurement to tell us how many shims are going to be needed in order to get the right clutch engagement. So basically what you're going to do here is, as you can see, you got that stud installed at the 2 o'clock position as the transmission sits in the car. You take your throwout bearing with no shims and slide that on, keeping that's what you want to make sure is that one of the instructions say that this will sit properly in between the two, and that keeps it from rotating on the transmission while you're operating it. So now that we've got the throwout bearing placed on the shaft, we're going to take a measurement from the face to the face of the transmission as it mates to the bell housing. So I'll show you that real quick and explain what measurements I got there. All right, here we go. So once again, you're going to take your measurement from the face of the throwout bearing. So I just put the straight edge against the front of the throwout bearing, got it into a position where I'd be able to use my caliper. Turn our caliper on, make sure it's zeroed, and then I just went from the face of my straight edge back to the face of the transmission as they instruct you to. And once again, I did that in 3 locations on the face of the transmission. It's up to you how you want to do it. I was looking for an average just to make sure that there was nothing out of whack. But generally came up with the same measurements within about 100th to almost 1,000th of each other. And ended up coming up with an average of 2.41 inches from the face of the throwout bearing to the face of the transmission. So with that number now, the instructions basically tell you to take the 2 measurements, the measurement from the face of the bell housing to the clutch fingers, and then the measurement of the throwout bearing to the face of the transmission, and that will tell you how many shims you should need to get your tolerance within, I believe it said, let me reference the instructions here. The instructions say that you're supposed to get the measurement 1/16 inch or 0.06 hundredths less than the dimension plus or minus 3 hundredths, and each shim is 5 hundredths thick. So as I said, they provide you with 10 of these shims, which after doing the math, to bring the measurement within that plus or minus, to bring the measurement within 6 hundredths of the face of the clutch fingers to this throwout bearing, plus or minus the 3 hundredths, I'm going to use all 10 shims, and that'll provide me with the clearance that I need. I slide those all on, put that back on, and as you can see, I mean, it pushes it out quite a bit, but it's still held in place by the stud. It's just long enough to keep it from rotating either way, which is perfect. And one thing I didn't explain is you're going to be your bleeder. This is going to be your supply, because you want your bleeder end to be the highest point on there. And then we'll be running that bleeder kit line up and out to a position where it's not going to, have any interference with the motor, and we'll be able to reach it easily to bleed it out. But that's it. That's all you need to do. And then what you could do is, and what I'll end up doing is, as you can see here, once, I'm not going to do it right now, but we're going to put this, we're mating this up to the bell housing. And once this is in, this is what's nice, is there is enough of a window here that once this goes in and is seated fully into the clutch and the crank and the flywheel, that I'll be able to take a measurement and I'll just use a 1/16 inch gauge, feeler gauge, to make sure that there is the play between this and the clutch fingers. All right, well, let's get this transmission mated into the bell housing here, and we can check that clearance between the throwout bearing and the clutch fingers. All right, so I'm just gonna put a little bit of grease on the end where this meets up to the crankshaft bearing, just as that sits in there. A little in there. A little bit can't hurt. A little bit of grease. And just so that, I mean, that's metal on metal, and this is slipping in through the actual clutch itself. So let's grease that up a little bit. Nothing bad, nothing crazy. All right. Pull our alignment tool out. Let's see if we can get this thing in there. It's a little awkward, but should be able to make it go in, no problem. Okay, well, we're gonna have to take the bell housing off because the hydraulic throwout bearing will not allow you to slip it in there as one piece. So there you go, lesson learned. Put your bell housing on and then your hydraulic throwout bearing. So I'll be right back. All right, got the transmission, made it to the bell housing, then installed the hydraulic throwout bearing with the shims, and then mounted the bell housing to the motor. And I don't know if you can see inside there, which looks like you can. Now my next step, I'm gonna take a feeler gauge, 1/16 inch feeler gauge, and check for the distance between the front of the throwout bearing and where the clutch fingers are. And as long as we got a 1/16 of an inch, we should be all right. So let me grab my feeler gauge and we'll check it out. All right, so got my 1/16 inch feeler gauge, and I'm checking for the clearance between the front of the throwout bearing and the clutch fingers, and I don't have any. I know you can't see it, but I can feel it. So I'm thinking I gotta take a shim out. So that's what I'm gonna do. Be right back. All right, let's try this again. So we're down 2 shims, and this is why I think it's important, and that's why I love the fact that it's got this opening in the bell housing, was even after all the measurements I took and the math that they tell you to do in order to determine the shim thickness, what ultimately it comes down to is that space between, I hope you can see this, that front of the throwout bearing and the clutch fingers. And I'll show you what a difference it is once you put my, once I put my feeler gauge in there. I know it's tough to see, but the company recommends 1/16 of an inch, but it goes right in, pulls right out without much interference. A little bit, but that's okay. And just because I don't think I want to pull another whole shim out. I think that'd be too much, and then there'd be too much slop in between the throwout bearing and the clutch. But at least at that point we know, and I know, that the clutch is not going to be constantly engaged if that is too far forward with even shimming it, you know. So it, like, basically you'd never get it in or out of gear. Once you got it in a gear, that's it, because you'd have constant pressure on that, on those clutch fingers, so you'd never get it into gear. it would never allow it to fully disengage. So I'm comfortable with it there, and that's where I'm going to leave it. All right, well, there you have it. That's the installation of the Howe Racing Enterprises hydraulic throwout bearing to the T5. Like I was just saying in that final clip, you know, you can do all the measurements and you can take every measurement that they tell you to. At the end of the day, it comes down to that clearance between the throwout bearing and those clutch fingers, which I'm just very glad that I'm able to measure it with a feeler gauge and get in there, because otherwise I would have gone by the measurements, had all 10 shims installed, and we would have never got the clutch to engage because it would have constantly been hitting the fingers, keeping the friction off of the clutch. So that's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching. I know this is a little bit of a longer one, and I'm trying to keep them to that 15 to 20 minute range, sometimes less. I mean, just depending on what the material is that I'm covering. I just want it to be as thorough and informative as possible. But as far as I know, this is probably the first time anybody's mated a T5 with a bell housing that works for the actual angle that the T5 needs to sit in the 3rd gen Camaro to an LS motor. So we'll see how long it lasts. I know people think it's gonna blow up the minute you put it into gear. We'll just see. If I blow it up, I blow it up, and we'll go on from there and figure out what we do. So I really appreciate everyone tuning in. I'm sure you noticed, I told you I'm trying to improve the videos, so I did add a new graphic to the beginning. My channel name originally was Modern Day Drifter. I've changed it to JEM Builds or Gem Builds. And that was with some help of my 12-year-old son. He suggested it. So that's what we're going with. But I appreciate you tuning in. Please consider liking, subscribing, sharing the video, and turning on all your notifications so that when I do put out posts for upcoming videos or new videos, you get all those and can watch them. So thanks again for tuning in. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.